Prologue. The young man made his way through the crowded market of the darkly majestic city of his people. The spires of Galthorlyn, dimly lit by the glow of bioluminescent mushrooms and mosses that clung to the floor and walls of the cavernous space the city was nestled in, were an architectural marvel within the darkness of the earth, constructed by the black-skinned elves that made their home here. Taelurien had no time to enjoy his surroundings, however. His mind was focused on the task his house had entrusted him with. "Can I help you find something, young one?" the elderly merchant now in front of him asked, displaying an array of alchemic substances. "I need these," Taelurien replied, pointing at a jar full of black leaves, the ones the quartermaster had asked for. "Shadowstalk, I see," the merchant said. "A good choice." Wasting no time with pleasantries, Taelurien dropped a couple of obsidian shards into the man's hand, bade him farewell, and headed towards the west exit of the plaza. Pushing himself through the crowd of dark elves, all of them hurrying to and fro on their own errands, was no easy feat at this time of day. Finally, he left the market and its crowds behind, grateful for the cool air that enveloped him as he began the ascent up the rocky slope that led to his family's home. After about half a mile of walking by himself, a sense of unease began to gnaw at Taelurien. There was an eerie stillness in the air, and the usual hum of activity that emanated from his household seemed gone. As he reached the top of the slope and went around a large rock outcropping hiding his family's estate from sight, he stopped dead in his tracks. The massive complex that had been housed Theor's home for generations was no more. In its stead, broken and scorched rubble lay everywhere, with scattered fire still smoldering in the aftermath of what must have been a colossal explosion. The stench of ashes and charred flesh drifted on the air. Taelurien's heart started pounding strongly in his chest, heavy with grief and disbelief as he took in the destruction before him. His mind was racing with questions. Who could have done this? And why had no one noticed the blast and come to investigate? He quickly remembered that his father had called for a congregation of the house. His entire family had been there, alongside all the other families that had pledged allegiance to his house's name. While not everyone was invited to sit in session, including Taelurien, it was unlikely that anyone else had been out and about. It was customary to stay with the house during these events, either to partake in the deliberations or to receive word of what had been decided. And Taelurien had only been absent because of the supplies he had gathered for the last couple of hours. It occurred to him that he was quite possibly the last heir of the once mighty House Theor. The young dark elf started searching frantically through the rubble of his family's home, struggling to come to terms with the devastation. As he approached the spot where the house would have congregated, all he found were the charred corpses of those who had been present, and there, at the head of the table which had been reduced to little more than smoldering splinters, his father. Taelurien approached slowly, taking shallow breaths. Next to the body of the man who had sent him away to join the Rangers just a few years ago, he saw something between the ashes. The singed remains of his father's sword, made from black adamant. Although the weapon was damaged, it remained in good shape. Taelurien quickly tested if the handle was still hot. The metal had cooled just enough, so he took the sword in his hand and continued his grim search. As he looked around further, his eyes suddenly fell upon a strange silver amulet that had somehow survived the blast in pristine condition. Taelurien recognized the material from his father's dealings with humans from a place called Cardion, a city in the upper world. Why had this bauble not melted like most of the other things around here that were not made of adamant? The dark elf picked it up cautiously, and to his surprise, it was quite cool. A black unknown rune was carved into its surface. Curious, he thought, weighing the amulet in his hand. Something felt off. Could someone from the upper world have been involved in this? Taelurien pocketed his find and began to recover his senses. He knew that whoever was responsible for an assault of this magnitude would want to see him dead too. With his father's sword by his side, he retraced his steps back to the market, the hood of his cloak pulled low over his face. The young dark elf quickly gathered supplies, including a new bow and rations, trying not to be recognized by anyone. He understood that he had to leave Galthorlyn as soon as possible, as whoever had orchestrated the attack would likely come looking for the results of his work, and once it was known that an heir had survived, he did not want to stay and find out. Taelurien knew where he had to go, just as he knew that the journey that awaited him was deadly, and he might not arrive at his destination at all. While he had been taught the ways of the ranger, a single dark elf alone in the wilds was easy prey for some of the more dreadful hunters in the night below. He would need plain luck to survive. Once he had reached the edge of Galthorlyn, he stopped in his tracks, considering to turn around and take a last glance at his home. No, he said under his breath, not looking back at the illuminated spires of the city and the underground lake it was nestled at. I will return. Passing by the massive adamant golem that had been positioned as a guard near the tunnel he was heading for, Taelurien felt a discomforting tingle in his belly. This journey through the Nightlands, the maze of subterranean tunnels and caverns that the Dark Elves had been banished to centuries ago, was to be the most dangerous expedition he had ever been on. He opened up to the feeling, let it wash over him, and fierce determination soon took the place of fear. After a last deep breath, he ventured out into the darkness. Solyana Obsidian Carver, a young gnome not much older than 20 winters, sat all by himself at a table in the cozy tavern, nursing his ale and glaring at the patrons around him. He was known to be ill-tempered, and most of the others avoided his company, but Melina, the elven barmaid, always had a kind word for him. She approached his table, and her bright red hair and emerald eyes reflected the flickering light of the candles. "Another ale, Solyana?" He grunted in response, and she smiled, used to his brusque manner. "Coming right up." As she left, the bard Fondir stepped onto a small stage in the corner, strumming his lute and launching into a cheerful tune. Solyana scowled, but couldn't help tapping his foot along with the music. Fondir soon finished his song to enthusiastic applause, and as he stepped down from the stage, he caught Solyana's eye. "How there, Grumpy? Enjoying the music?" Solyana rolled his light blue eyes, which stood in stark contrast to his grey skin, but complemented his short white hair. "I suppose." Fondir chuckled. "You know, I bet you'd like it even more if you joined in. You play any instruments?" Solyana grumbled something unintelligible, but the half-elf just laughed and moved on to the next table. As the night wore on, the tavern grew more crowded, the air thick with the smell of ale and roasted meat. Melina flitted from table to table, her easy smile and quick wit making her well-liked among the patrons. Fondir played song after song, his fingers dancing across the strings of his lute. Solyana leaned back in his chair. The fire crackled on the hearth, and for a moment life was good. He raised the steam to his lips, savoring the bitter taste of the ale. The door creaked open, and a stranger stood in the doorframe. He wore a hood low over his face and seemed to take in the entirety of the tavern. One of the patrons close to the entry complained irritably. The cold winter air was rolling in quickly. The stranger finally decided to enter, closed the door behind him, and made his way to the nearest corner, where he took a seat by himself. Solyana watched him warily, but the man didn't seem interested in anyone else. Melina approached him, her smile faltering just slightly as she caught sight of his hood. "Can I get you anything, sir?" "Just water," the stranger replied in a low voice, and Melina wondered at his audible accent. She also noticed that his clothing was dusty and torn in places, probably from an arduous journey. Solyana leaned forward, straining to hear or see more. The cozy tavern was filled with a buzz of conversation, clinking glasses, and the occasional burst of laughter, but the man just sat quietly in his corner, his face hidden in the darkness of his hood. The gnome finished his ale and stood up, casting one last glance at the newcomer. As he made his way towards the bar to exchange his empty stein for a newly filled one, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He didn't have to wait long.